It's hard for teenagers to travel, especially internationally. It's expensive.
Yeah.
Being in a small town with a small airport, as I'm sure you're aware, creates a lot of logistical hassles. Nothing is quick. Connections become a problem. So we started doing some research into where we wanted to be in traveling when we have time.
Hi, I'm Kim Tolson and I'm the traveling therapist. It's my passion to teach therapists how to navigate online private practices and multiple income streams so they can travel the world. I'm a digital nomad with a virtual insurance-based private therapy practice and a multi-six-figure coaching business. I'm obsessed with entrepreneurship and developing tools that can help therapists live an adventurous lifestyle. In this podcast, I will discuss my journey as a digital nomad. I'll chat with other traveling therapists and help you navigate the complexities of running an online insurance-based practice. I'm so glad to have you with me on this journey. Managing a successful private practice can be challenging, even if you have all the skills and experience you need to support clients. Most training programs offer little to no guidance on running your own business. That's why Alma gives clinicians the tools they need to build a thriving private practice. When you join Alma, you can get credentialed with major insurance payers within 45 days, as well as guaranteed payment within 2 weeks of each session. You can also attract clients who are the right fit for your practice with a free profile in Alma's searchable directory. As you build your caseload, Alma also offers time-saving tools and administrative support, so you can spend less time on paperwork and more time delivering great care to your clients. Visit helloalma.com/Kim to download your free guide to identifying and connecting with clients who are the right fit for your practice. That's helloalma.com/KYM to get your guide.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Traveling Therapist Podcast. I'm really excited today to have our guest, David Smith. So like a lot of my traveling therapist guests, oftentimes I'll just meet them in the Traveling Therapist Facebook group. And David posted something one day and I was like, that is a cool story. I was like, would you be on the podcast? He was like, absolutely. So David, welcome to the Traveling Therapist Podcast. I'm really excited to have you today. And I'd love if we could just start out and tell the listeners how you went from being your typical to a traveling therapist.
Thanks, Tim. Really honored, excited to be here. Your podcast has become part of my daily routine, just driving back and forth, listening to all these really inspirational, wonderful things that people are doing and learning so much that has opened my mind about how it's possible to do this really important work that we all do while still living a good life. It does not need to be in the kind of box that I've always assumed it would be in. And so, full disclosure, I wouldn't consider myself fully a traveling therapist yet. I'm at an early point, which I think might be instructional in itself. Yeah. I think, from a lot of the episodes that I've heard, that there are people who have just been doing this for a long time and they're traveling the world and having these wonderful adventures, but they've been in practice for a while and they've kind of figured this out. That's not me.
Yeah.
Number one, I'm new to being a therapist. So, I'm 55. This is a career that I started into in grad school when I was in my late 40s. I had been a stay-at-home dad and my kids got to a point where many reasons to want to start getting busy with something other than driving them around and being a glorified taxi driver. Mm-hmm. And we live my then wife and I live in a small town in Southern Oregon where we both still are, although we're no longer together. And I had been a management consultant for one of the big multinational companies, who was back in my previous iteration, and worked as a project manager for Blue Shield of California, lots of high profile, fairly intense executive jobs, which I left when we became parents and I became a stay-at-home dad. Trying to figure out what to do with my past experience and many interests and talents in a town of 38,000 people in a pretty remote area of the mountains in Oregon was not easy.
Yeah.
And so eventually, through many misadventures, I decided to go back to grad school and become a clinical social worker.
Oh, that's amazing.
So I started my first job out of my grad school at a community mental health agency as a school-based therapist. As many of us do, got completely overwhelmed with way too many clients. I was working part-time and had a caseload that varied between 45 and 65 kids and families,
Oh my.
and got very overloaded and wound up having to take leave of absence for a while, and then COVID hit. So it took me 5 years to get my license
Wow. Yeah.
during a very intense time. Being a school-based therapist during COVID was the intersection of many different forms of toxic stress. and
I could not
craziness.
even imagine. Yeah.
I've been tested for COVID, I think 45 or 50 times, always negative. But last year, I decided I was going to finally, last school year, so 2022 to 23, I decided I was going to make the final push, get my license, and then make some decisions about what I wanted to do. So I finally did achieve that in March, got my license, and decided that I could not do the school-based work any longer. I had been through this weird pattern. The reason I got tested for COVID so many times was because the stress was taking my physical and emotional system down over and over.
Yeah. Oh, I bet. Oh my God.
I'm sure you and your listeners are very aware of what stress can do to the body, and the whole window of tolerance concept and what happens when we exceed that. I was getting taken down every 6 weeks or so, and realized very fast that I was just not going to be able to continue this. So the question then was, well, what do I do instead? Especially living in this remote town where there are not very many options. There's a dire need for therapists, but I was not sure how I wanted to approach that. So in the background, I got married in June with my current wife for about 4 years. She's originally from Peru. She's been in the U.S. for 10 years, is now a U.S. citizen, but she's also a licensed psychotherapist, just from Peru.
So interesting.
When we met, it's interesting having a relationship between two therapists. We had to promise ourselves that we wouldn't diagnose each other on the first date. We waited until the second or third. The conversations could get pretty intense. She's also trained very differently. It took me a long time to explain to her how a social worker can be a psychotherapist.
Yeah.
Because that's not the role they play in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
She had the idea that, I was trained to be one of those people who arranges benefits when people are released from the hospital.
Yeah.
So that was a long conversation. But because she's licensed in Peru and does not have a degree or a license here in the U.S., she has done work as essentially a traveling therapist for at least 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, we were saying before we hit record, she's like the original traveling therapist, like true, but living back in the United States. Yeah.
And so her clients are everywhere from Chile to Argentina, of course, Peru, Colombia. She does have some in the U.S., mostly people who have Latin American roots. She does therapy both in Spanish and in English, and occasionally in Portuguese. She teaches workshops in A Course in Miracles. She does healing retreats. She's a really powerful woman.
That's amazing.
Exactly. She just led her first healing retreat in the Sacred Valley in Peru last week. I went down to join her for that and arranged this 7-day retreat around the concept of the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell, using meditation and yoga and plant medicine and shamanic rituals from all over the Andes. And it was just incredibly powerful. So she's got a lot going on, and she's been slowly pushing me toward the idea that I do not have to sit in an office and see clients in a physical location. I can be anywhere. She would like me to be in Lima, seeing clients there, living there part-time. And so when I reached the point where I felt like I could no longer be a school-based therapist in the way that I wanted, we've been talking for about 1.5 to 2 years about getting out of Grants Pass, this town that we're in. My kids are now at an age where it's not easy to think about that and being apart from them for long periods of time, especially having been the stay-at-home dad for so long. Yeah. But they know that I have wanted to be out of here. My parents have known that. They're also in this town. They've all given me their blessing. And so we've been searching to see where we want to be and how to make that work.
Before we were saying before we hit record that those are the things that usually will stop the traveling therapist process. But the kids or, aging parents or pets, something like that will keep kind of stuck locked in, especially if you're divorced or having to split custody. That makes it really difficult for people that follow the lifestyle. Yeah. So go ahead. You were saying then you guys have decided ways to try to make this work around all these other sort of obstacles that are going on back at home.
Yeah. And it is really challenging, especially when you're someone who takes parenting very seriously. Being present for my children's lives was something that I promised I was going to do to myself. probably 20 years before I ever had children. I was going to be the dad who showed up for everything. Every game, every concert. The divorce itself kind of broke that promise, because then I was only with them half time instead of every day, which was brutal. And that coming to terms with the balance between living my own life and being happy for myself while still meeting my responsibilities as I perceive them to my children has been it's involved a lot of therapy, let's just say.
Yeah.
So I finally reached a point where they are old enough and their life is organized enough that it's, I think, feasible for me to think about being somewhere else for long periods of time without really causing major damage to them. Mm-hmm. And we traveled to Peru last year with them. We took them on a 2.5-week trip to the Sacred Valley, Lima, the North Coast. They said it was one of the best trips of their lives. They loved it there. And they really started getting excited about the idea of me and Nane being in some place that was really different and being able to visit us there. And so then they started lobbying for where they wanted us to relocate to.
Oh, that's nice.
It's going to be complicated. They don't, it's hard for teenagers to travel, especially internationally. It's expensive.
Yeah.
Being in a small town with a small airport, as I'm sure you're aware, creates a lot of logistical hassles. Nothing is quick. Connections become a problem. So we started doing some research into where we wanted to be and traveling when we have time. So we went to Todos Santos down in Baja about 2 New Year's ago. Really liked it, but it's very hot and desolate. I'm not a desert person.
Yeah.
Love the town. It's a magical town, but I don't think we could live there. We went the next 2 years to Tulum, south of Cancun, Yucatan, and fell in love.
Oh, wow.
There's a magical energy there that is really hard to find anywhere else in the world. And it's exploding. I mean, they're doubling in size. That town is doubling in size about every 18 or 20 months.
Wow.
Became a digital nomad hub during the pandemic. And so it's got this sort of yoga, granola crunchy, alternative, fun, young, hip atmosphere to it. Lots of people from, for some reason, Argentina and Italy, as well as Mexico and the US and Canada. So it's this international hodgepodge, and it's constantly under construction.
Yeah.
So, but lots and lots of eco-friendly resorts and really innovative architecture and building going on. So we went back in March and wound up buying a plot of land.
Oh my goodness. Yes. You were mentioning that before we hit record. I really want to hear about this process, because I was telling you before we hit record, almost everywhere we go, like I'm sitting in the Dominican Republic right now, Las Terrenas. Everywhere we go, I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to buy something here and build? And, but it's not quite that straightforward. You can't just buy a place at a lot of places. So I'd love to hear about that process. Like, how did that go?
It's complicated. On one level, it's a lot simpler than I thought it would be. A lot of the hurdles that I thought would be problems turn out to be not that hard to overcome. So, like, for example, in Mexico, foreigners are not allowed to own land within 50 miles of the coast. Oh, really? In theory.
Okay. Oh, okay.
But a foreign trust can. So you simply go to a Mexican attorney and they create a trust in your name that then can own that land on your behalf. It's not that hard. I think it costs a couple $1,000s. Certain other things are a lot harder than I thought they would be. Okay. So if you are, when we first did this, when I first decided to do that, the people that were helping us, who were wonderful, kind, loving people, reassured us that they knew someone who was a mortgage broker who could arrange financing for us and get us a loan with a Mexican bank.
Building a private practice can be challenging. I know for me, when I was starting out, I had no idea how to get referrals. I had no idea how to manage paperwork. I knew nothing about insurance billing. The whole process was really daunting. Building a private practice can be challenging, to say the least. I remember when I was starting out, I had no idea how to get referrals. I had no idea how to navigate insurance. I had no idea even what paperwork was required. So growing a caseload, navigating insurance, and managing billing and paperwork all take significant amounts of time. And that's all in addition to delivering great care to your clients. That's why Alma gives clinicians the tools they need to build a thriving private practice. When you join their insurance program, you can get credentialed within 45 days and access to enhanced reimbursement rates. They also handle all the paperwork from eligibility checks to claim submissions, and they guarantee payment within 2 weeks of each appointment. So in addition to their insurance program, Alma also offers time-saving tools and administrative support, so you can spend less time on paperwork and more time delivering great care to your clients and traveling the world. Learn more about building a thriving private practice with Alma at helloalma.com/Kim. That's hello, ALMA.com/KYM to get started.
That turned out not to be accurate. So it is possible for a foreigner to get a loan through a Mexican bank, but you have to have residency. You have to have a credit rating in Mexico, and you have to go through all the normal lending procedures that you would elsewhere. So, I don't have residency yet. We've applied and we're waiting. In order to open a bank account and start establishing credit, I have to have the residency. So there's this delay.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, I'm paying for the land out of my Roth IRA, which is not money that I really ever wanted to touch. Finding architects is challenging. Doing this from a distance is not something that I would recommend because it's very nerve-wracking. This is a new development. They're still installing utilities and roads. It's hard to know exactly how trustworthy anyone really is. Keep hearing stories about the cartels. Of course, anytime you mention the word Mexico, people think cartel, and most of the time, it's really not as much of an issue as you think it is, unless you're on the beach trying to buy drugs you shouldn't be buying in the first place.
Right.
But yeah, there's a lot of worry involved. We're paying for the land currently in installments. Once we paid the full price for the land, then we will sit down with the developer and get title. You have to be careful about the land that you're getting and make sure that it's in Mexico and certain other countries, because we like to do this in Costa Rica as well. There are pieces of land that are not titled. They were owned by tribes, or they were just never recorded correctly. People will try to sell you that land. It's very difficult then to establish that you are truly the owner of it.
Wow. Yeah.
So you have to be careful about where you're actually buying and work with reputable people. So once we buy the land, the developer does have a sort of a design that they have already worked through architects that they can build for a fairly reasonable price. We are hoping to build something more custom, because the dream that both of us independently had, Nani and I, before we even met, was to open a healing retreat center somewhere in the world. She wanted to do this for sort of healing retreats organized around Vipassana meditation, plant medicine, yoga. Mine was more around building a cutting-edge center for the treatment of complex trauma, childhood trauma, which is my field. As a therapist, I work with complicated families, basically. Families where there's a lot of complex trauma involved, or neurodiversity. Probably 60% of my caseload is people who have autism somewhere in the family, either themselves or a family member, and intergenerational trauma. And so we've talked about building a center where we can host retreats and people can come for really intensive healing in beautiful places, either the Yucatan, the Riviera Maya in Mexico, or the Sacred Valley, or possibly both. Spend 6 months out of each year at each place, because each has their own sort of energy and their own. I don't know. Have you ever been to the Sacred Valley in Peru?
No, I don't. Oh, in fact, when you mentioned it, I'm like, I'm going to have to look that up and research it. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, you have to go. When you do go, I'll send you my wife's information. She can organize the trip of a lifetime for you. It's one of those magical places that, the only places I've ever been that compare to it are like Dharamsala in India, Yosemite in California, just those places that have this certain almost radiant holiness about them.
Yeah, totally. We did go to Yosemite this year, and I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, it's just beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I'm definitely going to set that on the list after talking to you about this. Yeah, my favorite.
This was when we went there last week, it was my 4th time in Peru.
Wow.
And each time I go back, it just is more magical.
Now, had you been to the Sacred Valley before, or was that the first stop there?
Yeah, so my 3rd time there. I've been to Machu Picchu twice, once on my own and once with my kids. And it is pretty mind-blowing, although there are other places in Peru that I like better. So I think you do need to see it, although it's getting harder. They're closing down more and more of it due to traffic and the damage the traffic is causing. But Cusco is just a magical city. And then you go down, people think of Machu Picchu as being way up in the mountains. It's actually not. It's down from Cusco. So, Cusco was the capital. That's at about 11 or 12,000 feet, depending on which part of the city you're talking about. And then you go down to Machu Picchu, which is their gateway to the Amazon in the Inca time. And in between, there are all these beautiful cities and valleys and mountains that feel almost impossible. They should not be able to exist with that level of steepness. So it's very cool. And the best food in the world, according to Condé Nast Traveler, for like 12 or 13 years in a row.
Oh my gosh. Yes. That sounds amazing. I'm going to have to definitely check that out. There's so many places to go. Like I was saying we're in the Dominican Republic right now, but we're already like, okay, do we need to come back here? Because there's so many other places to go, it's just,
yeah.
And that sounds amazing. So logical. So hopefully we'll be able to check that out too. So you were saying before we hit record that your plan now is to do really your first travel therapist trip coming up, right?
Yeah. So when I left my school-based work, I created a business model based on my experience there, which the hypothesis was that, at least in Oregon, and I think in most other places around the country, it's not exactly perfect to get help for kids who are struggling, but it is possible. So every school in our valley has some sort of mental health in the school. Finding help for the parents, if they need help beyond just, your occasional check-in with the child's therapist, is really, really difficult. A lot of therapists who work with children don't want to mess with the parent issues. They want to work with children for a reason. They didn't want to deal with all those adult complex problems. And a lot of people who work with individual adults don't have much training or interest in working with family issues and parenting. And so my strength as a child therapist in the schools was that I work with those really complicated family systems issues and involve the parents almost every time in the child's therapy, because I feel like, I've had trainings that said this, where if you are working, especially with an elementary age child, and you are not involving the adults in that child's life, you're not only probably not making their situation better, but you actually may be making it worse, because you're giving that child the illusion that if they keep coming to therapy, things will get better. And it typically will not, because they're going back to the same environment that created those problems in the first place. So when I set out to launch my private practice, my goal was to work with those really complicated families. Wow. And not so much with the children, because they can get help in other places, but to work with the parents or caregivers. And so I work a lot with complex trauma, autism, neurodiversity, just those really messy family situations. And I built it explicitly as a telehealth only practice, in part, frankly, because I didn't want to pay overhead for an office, in part because our area is really remote and people they'd have to travel quite a ways to come to an office. And in part because I had this sense that the work that I was doing would appeal to a much wider area. So I'm licensed in Oregon. I got my license in Idaho as well. I'm a registered telehealth provider in Florida, which is surprisingly easy to get.
Super easy. Yeah.
And so I have clients, and I have a temporary license in Kansas because I had someone who contacted me from there asking if I could help. And I'm expanding as I go along. So I've got clients in several states. And when we go down to Tulum for New Year's, we're going to be there for 2 weeks. And I will have my first experience of seeing people from a remote location, other than my house, So my house could be anywhere. It could be in Mexico. But yeah, I built it in a sense with the idea that it's sort of like this little spaceship that I can move around wherever I am in the world, as long as I'm careful about whatever the local laws are. And as far as I've been able to discover, psychotherapy in Mexico is largely unregulated. So I haven't heard of any obstacles.
That's my understanding as well. I know a lot of people that work for Mexico, live in Mexico, licensed in the United States, and there's no problems. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exciting. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. And then the long-term idea is that we could potentially be moving around in different parts of the world, spending part of our time in different locations. I've even had this dream that I mentioned in that Facebook post that eventually, one of my lifelong dreams since I was about 10 years old has been to sail around the world, or at least across an ocean. And I've been a pretty serious sailor since I was about 9. I'm certified to be a skipper for boats up to about 55 feet. And I have had this idea of having healing retreats for trauma while sailing somewhere out in the ocean. It would be very powerful. Now, from a liability standpoint, I start getting nervous.
Yeah. Liability, but the experiential part of it, like even, I could just, when you wrote that, I was like, I could totally see that and how amazing that would be. Mm-hmm.
I mean, just think about Outward Bound. In reality, I don't know that it's going to be feasible for all kinds of logistical reasons. But I do think having a healing retreat somewhere on the coast, like Tulum, or up in the Sacred Valley of Peru would be completely viable. And my wife and I are working on a business model to make that happen. She, especially in Peru, she knows everyone. Here we talk about 7 degrees of separation. I think in a country like that, it's more like 2 degrees of separation. Wow. So if she wants to find a particular shaman to do a particular sort of healing work, she either knows that person or she knows someone who knows them. And they typically will agree to do it. So she's able to do some really powerful stuff.
That's so cool. Well, I hope you guys create these things that you'll share them in our Facebook group.
Absolutely.
Other people can get exposure to it and know that it's happening.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I'm going to get your wife's name after this, see if she'll come on and talk to me too, because, I get a lot of American-based therapists. I don't get a lot of therapists outside in other countries.
Yeah.
And, hearing their traveling stories, like how does it work for a therapist in Peru? It sounds like she can be anywhere too. So it's just super interesting. Yeah. Your time, I hope you'll update us and let us know how the trip goes, and even the property and building your custom-made home and all of that in Tulum. Like, that's super exciting to hear how it goes, and maybe you can help other people like navigate that process a little bit, because just hearing you talk about it, it's like, ooh, it's kind of scary, just thinking about, trusting the right people and getting the right people to help you and all of that. It seems like it can be challenging, but I'm sure super rewarding once it's finished and you're living there.
Yeah. It was definitely taking a leap of faith.
Yeah.
So hopefully we will not wind up regretting that. We'll see.
I hope so too. To help you fair pictures of that too, that'd be pretty cool to see. Yeah. Because
I'll do that.
In Tulum, we're seeing clients, it's pretty neat. Yeah. So let's brief time. How can people reach you if they want to work with you or learn more about what you're doing? How can they find you?
That's a great question. So my practice is called Thriving Family Therapy. The website is thrivingfamilytherapy.com. Reach by email at david@thrivingfamilytherapy.com. I do have a Facebook page. I'm in the Facebook group for the traveling therapist. So people can find me there as well. And I'd love to hear from people. The stories that I hear on your podcast are so inspirational and have opened my mind up to so many different possibilities for how this all could work. One of the reasons that I left my job was that they were insisting on all of us returning back to physical work on the clinic site. And I think so many of us have moved on. And, I think there are a lot of people who are investigating what would have been really radical ideas for how you could live your life post-COVID. And I'm one of those people. And it's there's so much information that has come out through your work about how to make those dreams come true. Very practical and very doable. And really opened my mind up to a lot of different ways that I could possibly live. So thank you.
Those are the things I never thought about when I created the podcast, but to hear stuff like that, like I heard your podcast and it inspired me to be able to do this. It's just really touches my heart. So I'm glad that it has that impact on you. Yeah. And I just want to hear more and hope that you have a wonderful journey, and maybe you'll come back in a year or two and let us know how it's going.
Okay. Thanks, Kip.
Thank you so much for listening to the Traveling Therapist podcast. For show notes, links, and downloads, head over to thetravelingtherapist.com, where you'll be able to learn more about my journey, the courses I've created for you, and other exciting resources to make your dreams become a reality. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share with your traveling therapist friends, subscribe to the podcast, and if you love this episode, please leave a review.